Captain S.K. Alfstad, United States Army, Iraq, and Afghanistan. I interviewed S.K. in my home here in Colorado yesterday, May 3rd, 2024, and he's been a longtime friend of me and my family, and he's just a great, great man. And I had that privilege to sit down with him for over an hour yesterday and talk about what he did in the Army for 8 years. He was in the Army here out of Colorado. He was deployed twice, once to Iraq in 2005, and then 5 years later he went to Afghanistan, 2010, 2011. And he was a chaplain, and I just so admire him. I've always been inspired and intrigued with the spiritual side of combat, and he was right there, folks. He was right there with the wounded, the dying, and the needs that were among the troops when he was over there. But 9/11 was the motivator of him and others joining the military, and it was a calling card for a lot of them. They've sensed that duty to serve their country, and thank God they did, and thank God they are serving our country. But S.K., we salute you, brother. Thank you so much for sharing your story with me. S.K. served with the infamous 1st Infantry Division on his first tour in Iraq, the Big Red One. If you know your history, World War II, they were very key in the D-Day Normandy invasion in June 6, 1944, which we're coming up on another anniversary. My goodness, I think we're looking at 80 years now. S.K. served with the 369th and the 863rd Engineer Combat Battalion on his deployments. And like I said, folks, he tells a great story, how they had chapel services all over the place in those two countries, and just a great story as I continue to share more stories from Iraq and Afghanistan. He's got a wonderful family here. I buy eggs from S.K. He's just a great guy. You're going to love his story. Folks, I want to also let you know that S.K. works with a nonprofit organization which he founded, he created, called G.A.N.G, Giving Adolescents New Goals. And their website is positivegang.org. I'll put it on the screen. But the G.A.N.G focuses on less privileged young people by giving them new choices, goals, and options in life through free programs which promote creativity, academic progress, and physical activity. And the way they do this is through free sports, camps, and monthly youth enrichment kits that the kids can use in their own homes. So it's a great organization. Like I said, the website is positivegang.org. I just want to give a shout out to S.K. and his work with the young people in this community. I've worked with him, I've done concerts with him, I've gone out to some of the sporting events, the camps, and it's just a feel-good time. And anything that's involving our young kids, especially less privileged children, is a great thing in my eyes. So, but if you'd like to donate to S.K.'s work, I will put a link in the video description and in the comment section of this video, or you can contact me directly, and it'll go to G.A.N.G, so it'd be greatly appreciated. Okay, folks, sit back, invite the family. Let's watch and honor another one of my veterans, and I'm just so grateful for S.K.'s story. I came back from Arizona a couple of weeks ago. A lot of you know I went down there to interview veterans. I've got my next trip will be to Florida, so if you live in Florida, you might get a hold of me, but I'll be going to the Orlando area. So that'll be coming up soon, and I'm really excited about that. I'm not traveling as much. I'm getting older. I'm not going to use that as an excuse, but I did so much traveling in the 10 years that I was really, really hitting it hard, that I'm a little burned out with it, but I'm still going to do it if the cause is great enough. It's worth the effort, and thank God our veterans are worth the effort. So, okay, S.K. Alfstad, Captain Alfstad, we salute you. Thank you for sharing your story with me. Thank you for subscribing to this channel and for sharing these videos. And I say God bless you, and I'll talk to you soon. good. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. I know parts of your story, just like with some of my veterans, but I don't know a lot of what you did in the military. So, but I'm just going to ask you the same questions I've asked veterans for 21 years now. So the first question is the toughest. Well, how old are you now?
I think I'm 61.
Are you in your 60s?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
So you're catching up with me, man. As far as the military, SK, tell me about. Obviously, you enlisted. There was no draft. So tell me what was the motivation? Why did you decide to go into the military, and why did you choose the Army? And what particular MOS did you have when you first entered the military?
9/11. I wanted to do my part to serve, and I'm not exactly sure why I picked the Army. Maybe I heard about chaplains in the Army, and I thought that would be a good fit for me, given my background and my education. So, yeah, one thing led to another, and I had to get a waiver because of my age. I think at that time I was around 40 years old, but they were really desperate for people, and so I was able to get a waiver and get in.
So you're working, you've got your ministry. Again, do you think 9/11 itself was a reason why you entered the military after 9/11? Because did you go in after 2001?
Yes, I went in after the attack.
Tell me what you remember about that day, that morning, and where you were when 9/11 happened.
I was at a teachers conference in Denver, and myself and a fellow teacher, we were eating breakfast. And I remember the waitress came to our table, and she didn't seem particularly alarmed, but she said a plane flew into one of the Twin Towers. And based on the way she said it, I thought, oh, that's too bad. It was maybe a Cessna or something like that. And unfortunately, I'm sure there was some damage and maybe a few people killed, and didn't think a lot of it. And apparently the guy I was with didn't think much of it either. So we continued, we ate our breakfast. And then when we walked out into the lobby, we saw just this huge crowd of people around the TV in the lobby. We thought, wow, what's going on? There must be something more to it. So we got ourselves into a position where we could see and realized that it was a lot bigger than that, and the magnitude of that situation started to sink in.
It was surreal.
Very surreal.
When I watched the second plane, it's like, was this a movie? I mean, because
Right.
Hollywood has desensitized us.
Right.
So, so at that point, I don't know if you could recall, but at what point did you think, and was that a driving force maybe in why you wanted to, was it kind of like payback, or just you felt a sense of duty like they did after Pearl Harbor was attacked?
Yeah, probably that. Just a real sense of patriotism, wanting to serve. And so that was definitely, I think, the biggest motivation.
Did you have any idea what you were in for when you initially went in?
No idea.
How about you went in as a chaplain, or the MOS for a chaplain, whatever
Yes.
that is? Do you remember what it is? A Bravo? Or what? Do you remember that?
Alpha something, I can't even tell you now.
Okay.
I don't even remember the number.
But you went through basic training like any infantryman.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Where was your basic training at?
Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
Yeah. And then after that, did you have advanced training somewhere?
No, that was pretty much it. That was all the training that I got was at Fort Jackson. It was pretty intense, pretty extensive. So they did a really good job there.
So you went through boot camp like everybody else?
Right.
Do you remember your first state boot camp? And you were older than all these people, so
I do.
How did that work?
Yeah, it was kind of a funny story. So I get off the bus, and this drill sergeant just starts yelling at us and has everybody go down and do push-ups. So I'm thinking, yeah, okay, well, got to do it. So I started doing it, and they found out that I wasn't supposed to be there, and they were very apologetic and got me out and got me to a really nicer barracks where the chaplain recruits were supposed to stay. So it was kind of funny. But I got off and think, okay, well, this is what I got to do. So I got down and did the push-ups with everybody else, with all the other enlisted.
How did they find out you were a chaplain? Going to be a chaplain?
I guess they looked at the paperwork.
And then they actually apologized?
Yeah.
A drill sergeant?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, sir.
Yeah. I didn't know any better.
That's funny. I never heard that in all my stories,
Right.
apologizing. Okay, so, and then the training, what kind of training do they do for a chaplain? Is it all theological things, or you're still working out physical stuff too?
Right. No, we had to get up and do the PT very early in the morning. PT, and we had to do, basically, under Geneva Convention rules, chaplains cannot touch a weapon, kind of like a medic, but obviously we had to learn how not to get shot and how to avoid, and so we had to go through all of that, the gas mask training and all the crawling and all that kind of really neat kind of stuff we had to go through, boot camp kind of stuff. And so yeah, we went through the whole bit, and it was pretty exciting. Pretty intense. It wore me out, definitely.
Yeah, and you were in your 40s when you went in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, that's a feat. And then you graduated, and then there was no advanced training, like you'd go to an infantry training if you're an infantry or artillery.
Right.
So where did you go after basic training?
I got assigned, I mean, there was, I think it was a week-long training in Colorado Springs that I had to go to, and so, but that was really about it. And then I think periodically there would be some trainings that we would have to attend, but for the most part, once I was done with basic training, I was in. And the mornings were dedicated to Army stuff, the Army training, and then afternoon it was more classroom, more chaplain type learning.
Were you training and learning along the lines of being in combat someday and the situations you would face?
That was right. That was the morning session, the morning training. And then again, afternoon, actually into the night, was more of the chaplain training.
Now, are these Protestant chaplains, or did they have Catholics and rabbis there? Or?
All, yeah, everybody. All different denominations, faiths, religions.
Mm-hmm. So, and then were you assigned to a particular, were you with the National Guard then basically?
Reserve.
You were reservist, Army Reserve. Okay, were you assigned to a particular, like a division or a company eventually?
I was. Initially I was with I believe it was the 244th Medical Battalion out of Denver, Aurora more specifically. But then there was a need for chaplains, so the 1st Infantry Division wanted me, so I was reassigned or transferred to the 1st Infantry Division to go to Iraq in 2005.
So that was your first deployment then, 2005?
Yeah, I was called a individual augmentee.
So the time between basic training, your training, and the deployment, you're back home working, and then you would do a monthly drill?
Correct, yeah. It was,
over in Denver?
Right, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year.
So tell me when it started, when it came down that you guys are going to be deployed, the announcement of that, coming back home, talking with your family. Mm-hmm. Tell me that time.
So I was probably about 6 months. I was doing my 1 weekend a month in Denver, 2 weeks a year, and I would manage to get 1 2-week stint with that battalion out of Denver, and then I was contacted and notified that I was going to be transferred or reassigned as an individual augmentee to the 1st Infantry Division to go to Iraq.
Do you know the history of the Big Red One?
A little bit, yeah.
World War II?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, they were instrumental in D-Day, Normandy, all that.
It was definitely an honor to be with them.
A lot of history there, yeah.
Right.
So again, you've come home, you say, Tanya, I'm leaving in 2 weeks, or I'm leaving in 6 months, or what was the time frame there? Is there a big lag in between?
I think there might have been a month, 6 weeks maybe.
But within yourself, it's like, getting called orders to go to Vietnam. I mean, you're going to be deployed.
Right.
And the thought process for you then was, are you like me? You think up too much, or is it just like follow orders? I'm going, I'm gone. I mean, how was that thought process for you?
Yeah, it was pretty much again kind of a surreal experience, but it was follow orders. This is what you want me to do. This is what I'll do. This is where I'll go, and just basically just following orders, following the steps.
Did you enlist as an officer?
Commissioned as an officer.
Okay, how do you get commissioned as an officer? What's the process for that?
I think the main thing is a college degree. So that having that college degree automatically got me commissioned as an officer for first lieutenant.
So your rank going to Iraq was a first lieutenant?
Correct.
Okay. So it's 2005. Do you remember the day or the month that you left home?
I don't, honestly.
Was it summer, winter?
It must have been summer because it was blazing hot over there, but it's always blazing hot over there. So, yeah, honestly, I don't even remember now.
So did you hook up with everybody in Denver and from Denver fly somewhere, or do you remember?
So I think I was pretty much on my own until the East Coast. And I'm trying to remember, I think it might have been Fort Dix, New Jersey. It was either I'm getting Afghanistan and Iraq confused. Mm-hmm. I think, Afghanistan was Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, and Iraq was Fort Dix, New Jersey, is where I met up with the unit or the battalion.
So you didn't know anybody?
Mm-mm.
So you say, I'm here. They take, what, a couple of weeks to get things together? Or did you fly out of there to Iraq then?
No, we were at Fort Dix for probably a few weeks.
How long was this first deployment? 6 months?
A year.
Or a year. So you're going to be gone a whole year.
Right.
Wow. Okay, so tell me about your trip over to Iraq and what you experienced when you got there.
Well, for a while you fly commercial. It's these commercial airlines, and they contract with them, and so we all go over in kind of nice airlines, so everything's pretty comfortable so far. And then we got to Kuwait, and Kuwait's pretty nice. We were in a base or barracks there for actually quite a while, for a long time. And so just getting ready, getting prepared. And then from Kuwait, then we actually took military transport, had to gear up, full gear, get on the plane, and travel to theater, which was Baghdad.
So that was your base or your FB or your...
Yes, yeah. Baghdad was my main base.
What do they call them?
FOBs, FOBs.
Yeah. Okay, so you're there. And did you stay there the whole time?
Well, pretty much, but then I traveled around a lot. FOB Danger, I just remembered. Our FOB was called Danger, FOB Danger. And it was actually in Tikrit, which was Saddam Hussein's hometown. So, and it was a palace complex, one of Saddam's palace complexes, one of his massive estates. And there was his main palace, but then there were several smaller palaces and ponds. I mean, it was pretty extravagant, pretty amazing setup. We took that over and actually made it into our military base.
Do you remember the company or the division you were with, or was it just the 1st Infantry Division?
1st Infantry Division, and then I would basically travel around to the different companies. If there was a chaplain that was going home on R&R or emergency leave or for whatever reason, because the 1st Infantry Division had a lot of companies in that area of operation. So basically I would travel around and fill in for different chaplains. Again, if they were going on R&R or had to go on emergency leave or whatever, for whatever reason, I would fill in for these other chaplains.
So the Iraq War had been going on a couple of years, since 2003. And all because of 9/11 in 2001. Okay, so you're over there. Okay, so SK, just walk me into Iraq and your role there. Tell me what you remember about the first encounter you had with somebody who was wounded or killed, and what type of interaction, and what was your job at times like that?
Yeah, it was tough. It was, again, one of those surreal moments. A soldier that was hit with shrapnel from an IED, sustained severe facial and head injuries. Actually, it was really hard because he was stabilized in theater, able to get him to Kuwait and then to Walter Reed. But unfortunately at Walter Reed, I got the news that he passed away. He didn't make it. So that was really hard because I thought each step of the way it sounded like he was doing okay and he was going to recover. But then I'm not sure of the details, but for whatever reason, because of complications, he passed away at Walter Reed. So that was my first one. Really difficult situation. Obviously, it happened in the middle of the night. It was a patrol that was out late, and get roused awake and saying, "Chaplain, we need you over in the medics tent," which is actually really close to where I was staying on this particular base. It wasn't into Crit. I was again filling in at another base, and so I was there, and then trying to just provide comfort to him, which he was pretty out of it, so I don't think he remembered much. But then after that, just providing support and comfort to his fellow soldiers.
So that initial contact with the wounded gentleman, is it just you're trained for this, or your compassion? Do you pray even though he's unconscious? Is there a pray? I mean, you don't tell me what you pray. Is that your role? Is to provide that spiritual support?
Yeah.
In any way, and they call for you, just like they call for a medic or a corpsman. They call for the chaplain.
Right.
Okay, I'm sure a Catholic boy probably asks for a priest, right? Or does it matter?
I guess it depends on how devout they are, but in certain situations,
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So you remember this first person? You remember? Wow. Yeah. So what about the troops? How do you set them all down? Do you make rounds? Do they come to you? Dealing with the death.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you act and react in those situations?
It's both. I mean, a lot of soldiers will come to me and just, admit they're really stressed out and upset about the situation. So I try to do what I can to listen to them. If they're open to spiritual things, then obviously the story of Joseph was always kind of my go-to story. I mean, if you're in this situation, it looks really bleak and dismal, but remember what Joseph went through, and he hung in there and stuck it out, and eventually he saw that there was a greater purpose to his suffering and what he went through. So that was kind of always my go-to story, my favorite story for soldiers that were really kind of stressed out and young, obviously, so they had a hard time dealing and coping with certain situations. And then it would depend on the company commander, the platoon leader, how spiritual they were. They might try to get everybody together and say, "Here's the chaplain, and he would like to say a few words to you." But some didn't. It was just kind of depending on the leader and how open they were and how spiritual they were.
Were you involved with any chapel services? Were they held on a regular basis? Were you presiding over those, or somebody else? Or
yeah, we have a kit. It's like a green army little kit, chaplain's kit, and it had a little cross in it. It had a little communion set. So we would set up church anywhere. It might be the hood of a Humvee, the tailgate of a Humvee. And in Iraq, we had Humvees. In Afghanistan, the vehicles were more updated. But anyway, it could be a rock. It could be any place. You'd set it up, and soldiers would come, and everybody's sweaty and dirty, and there's church. The most memorable church service I had was in Afghanistan. It was a really small platoon that was kind of in a remote area in Afghanistan. It was cold. It was a little more to the north, up in the mountains, and it was really cold. And it ended up being like this little recreation tent they had on their base, and they had a ping pong table. It was broken down, but that was our altar. I set everything up on that ping pong table. And it was really difficult because it was so cold. I could barely talk, and my chaplain assistant brought his guitar. He was my worship leader, and he could barely play and sing because it was so cold. But it ended up it was a Christmas Eve service, and it ended up probably being one of the most memorable special services I've ever had.
That's kind of like write a story about that, man. That's touching.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Did you sing Christmas songs too? Probably, maybe.
Yeah, we did. We did.
Yeah.
We had some Christmas
Well,
songs,
that's
and
beautiful.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
basically a Christmas Eve service.
We'll get to Afghanistan in a minute, but back in Iraq. So you're there for a year. Tell me one or two other stories of the wounded, maybe the worst day over there as far as wounded or killed, and your role in all that.
Yeah, definitely the first one probably was the worst. I mean, I guess they're all bad, but and then the day that I found out he passed away was sticks out of my mind as being particularly tough because, again, the medics did a great job, got him stabilized there, got him to Kuwait, got him to Walter Reed. So, we're thinking, oh, okay, it's looking good. And then for whatever reason, complications, he passed away at Walter Reed. And I just remember that particular day getting that news was very rough, very difficult. So.
But any other wounds or casualties, just wounded people throughout that tour, or that year there? Did you encounter other opportunities where you were called upon and you had provide spiritual assistance to a wounded person? I mean, there were other opportunities too, or was it not? Did you guys pretty much not have a lot of that?
We had a few. I mean, and I guess the few others were thankfully more minor injuries. I mean, individuals maybe sustaining some shrapnel in the leg or arm or not life-threatening. So just being there, because they were obviously probably, shaken up, so scared, but, thankful that they survived. So just being there to support them. But yeah, the one, I believe the name was Timothy Hawkins, him just, sustaining those life-threatening injuries was difficult. But yeah, there's a few others but again, they were minor, thankfully minor injuries. And so we were able to get through it okay.
Good. So tell me what other needs the troops had that they'd come to you for, non-combat related. The stress of being there,
Right.
maybe a Dear John letter. Tell me some things that happened in counseling you may have provided with. What was the most difficult or the more common things like that happening?
Yeah, it was, it's interesting. I had a really interesting conversation one time with a Vietnam era chaplain. And he said that Vietnam and on back to World War II, the soldiers weren't as attached to issues and situations back home because it was basically via letter. They'd get a letter, they might hear about a situation, they would write and respond, send it off, but it'd be a long time before they got a response back. So they weren't that attached. But starting with Iraq with computers, and we had tents that had computers in them, internet, so soldiers could stay in touch, and there was phones and different things that we could keep in touch with our loved ones, which was great. But on the other hand, we were so closely and directly involved with situations back home. And of course, we would know about it, and soldiers would be a part of the drama, but there wasn't really anything that they could do about it. So it was really hard because they were so immersed in situations back home. And so a lot of soldiers would just need to talk to me about what's going on back home. So just providing a listening ear. And then there were a lot of times where they would just come out to me just very stressed out. Maybe they had been in a firefight or whatever, and they were just really stressed out. And some weren't necessarily open to spiritual things, so I would listen, and they would want more of a clinical response or some clinical help. So I would escort them to behavioral health and get them the help they needed that way. And so it was just there to support them. There was maybe a couple of situations where my assistant and I actually had to secure a soldier's weapon because he or she was suicidal. So we did that, and then we were able to get them to behavioral health and then on out of there, get them back home because mentally they just weren't fit to stay there. So it was a lot of that. It was a lot of counseling and trying to help stressed out soldiers, help them deal with their situations. not only in combat, but back home.
What was the most rewarding part of this time that you had in Iraq as far as your job? What's the most rewarding experiences? Just helping people or just...
Yeah, providing a church service out in some really remote area for people that wanted church. Um, that was something that was very important to them and very comforting to them and gave them a lot of strength. So being able to go and do that was very helpful. And helping stressed out soldiers, again, if they were open to prayer and more spiritual things and principles from the Bible, just being able to listen to them and then share with them some of those principles from the Bible, and to know that they really walked out of there feeling more encouraged and helped was good. And even the ones that weren't open to spiritual things but wanted a clinical answer, just being there for them, making sure I escorted them to the behavioral health, and so they were able to get the help they needed via that route.
So you've got men and women over there that are
Right.
deployed. So
Right.
did you counsel with both?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just intrigued by the spiritual side of combat. I always have been, from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, the Gulf War, and just the interaction and the things that you had to do with. I think, I've interviewed people that have come back from overseas, and they were having some issues.
Right.
A lot of them were disillusioned about why they were there. So you probably saw all that, and then maybe somebody leaving them at home, their spouse leaving them.
Right.
That'd be devastating to somebody over there.
Oh yeah, it was.
Yeah. So you had a company that you were with? Is that what you're saying? You were with a company, or you traveled to different companies, but...
Right. Yeah, I was with the Big Red One, the 1st ID Division, and so they oversaw different battalions, and then of course they oversaw companies. So I traveled around a lot. I filled in and was with a lot of different soldiers, a lot of different companies, different battalions, a lot of different platoons.
Did you travel through a Jeep or a truck or what?
In Iraq, the chaplain and my assistant, we had our own Humvee. And so the chaplain, I was actually trained to drive, and my assistant literally rode shotgun. So I drove while he was in the driver's seat, ready to shoot if necessary.
So you had a machine gun there with you, like an M60 or something?
Yeah, he just had his M16. So yeah, and so that's how we traveled around. I would drive, we'd link up with a convoy, we'd be in a base, and we'd find out about a convoy moving on to another location. So we would just link up and join in with that convoy and travel around to different bases. And it was kind of exciting because, again, I drove and we had to make sure, we drove in the middle and tried to evade areas where we thought there might be IEDs. So it was pretty exciting.
Yeah, I was going to say that'd be a little stressful driving, because they can be anywhere.
Yeah.
You
We also traveled by Black Hawk helicopters a lot. So either I would drive in our Humvee, or if it was an FOB that was a lot farther away, we would get into a Black Hawk. And there was an area where the Black Hawks flew around, and they had a pretty elaborate transportation system there with either convoys or Black Hawk helicopters. And if it was bigger bases, it would be the military airplanes and the bigger helicopters and different things. So, but I travel around by Black Hawk a lot as well.
Well, tell me the experience of the helicopter, and I think of the Huey helicopters in Vietnam that were used to transport troops. So in a similar situation, so was that exciting? The adrenaline out?
Yeah.
I mean, how many people could fit on a Black Hawk? Was it a bunch or just a few?
Not a bunch. Now, if we had more people, it was the Chinooks, which was very nauseating because you're sitting sideways and they do evasive maneuvers. And I mean, the Black Hawks would do evasive maneuvers, but that was when they got closer to the FOBs. But the Chinooks were always doing the evasive maneuvers, and it was, I got sick one time, and a lot of people would get sick.
Did those Black Hawks, were they used for like combat assaults of any sort, or just transportation? I mean, like in Vietnam, they had their combat assaults, or would they go out into an area? Probably not. Maybe the warfare was different in Iraq, but...
Yeah, no, they had the machine. the machine guns mounted, and they had it on both sides, and so they were ready to attack if necessary, more just for defense. But the Blackhawks weren't really, not like the Apaches. The Apaches were more the offensive attack helicopters, but the Blackhawks were more transportation, but they were definitely prepared to shoot and defend themselves if necessary.
That's great. I'm just intrigued by all that, man. So you're in Iraq now. In Vietnam, when they got short, meaning they're 60 days of leaving country, did you call it being outside the wire, by the way, when you got out? Okay.
Yes.
In Vietnam, I was out in the bush or whatever. Okay, so when you got short on your time home, let me ask you this. Were you writing back and forth at home? Was mail call important to these troops and to yourself?
Well, it was email.
Email?
I was emailing and
Boy, where have I been?
Calling, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
No letters in the mail?
No, I think it was just back then it was all email.
Well, because the USO and they send letters over. You know, anybody can write a letter to a soldier, so that would be physically delivered. But that's interesting. You're right, email. So were you doing video calls back then in 2005? I don't know.
Not then. I did a lot of Skyping when I was in Afghanistan, but no videos in Iraq.
So when you're getting ready to go home, is it exciting? Is it like I'm getting out of here? I don't ever want to be deployed again? Or are you just like this was great? I'm looking forward to going home. And then tell me about the day you went home.
Yeah, no, it obviously it feels really good to be getting out of there, to get back home, and yeah, it was definitely a good feeling. I remember just being on when you finally get to commercial. You know, we finally got back to Kuwait. Was able to get on we went to Kuwait and then we got back on the commercial, and was able to get a little more comfortable, take off the battle rattle, and just relax a little bit. And it was a good time to kind of decompress and just relax. And I actually had a row to myself, so that was nice. So. But
you were ready to leave when it was time to leave?
Yes.
I mean, did you go by yourself or as a unit?
I went with my chaplain assistant.
So basically, on your own, you didn't deploy.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, but was it any regrets or a sadness to leave? Do you feel like you did your job? You helped people, and
yeah. I mean, I definitely felt like I did my best. You know, to be there to provide church for those who wanted it, to be there to counsel and try to help out soldiers to the best of my ability who wanted it. And that it'd be in the middle of the night. It was definitely no set schedule. And sometimes my assistant and I would go visit. We walk around and visit soldiers in different places, and some of them would be stationed on guard duty in the middle of the night. So we'd go by and visit them and just see how they're doing. So yeah, there was no set schedule. I mean, we were just, it was 24/7 for sure.
Who was your supervisor? Who would you report to? Your boss?
So I believe his title was Deputy Division Chaplain. He was my direct supervisor in Iraq.
Wow. So you come back home. Was there a big homecoming for you? I mean, was it a big deal, or was it just kind of like, I'm home?
Yeah, no. Coming back as an individual, there was no big deal at all. So I mean, there was I wasn't married at the time when I was in Iraq, so I got home and it was my mom and I think my sister and nieces and nephews, a few nieces and nephews, but that was it. So yeah, they're at the airport and it was no big deal.
So they didn't spit on you and call you baby killers?
No.
Just kidding. That was Vietnam.
Yeah,
holy smokes.
That's sad. They definitely deserved a whole lot better than that. And every time I see somebody with a Vietnam veteran hat or whatever, I try to definitely make it a special point to thank them and just let them know that we definitely appreciate them and they deserved a much better homecoming.
One more question about Iraq. Any interaction you had with the kids or the people that lived there?
Yeah, that was kind of neat. I had some interaction with some of the locals, and it was pretty cool. There was one time where this local came up to me, and he obviously didn't, his English was pretty bad, but he was able to communicate enough to say, I want a cross. Can you give me a cross? And where we were at that time, I mean, if he would have been caught with that cross, he probably would have been killed. So, but it meant so much to him, and I was able to get him a cross, and he really cherished it. So that was pretty neat.
Good story.
Yeah.
That's special. Do you take any pictures in Iraq, or do you have pictures of yourself in Iraq?
Yeah, I think there are a few pictures.
Well, if you can, not now obviously, but at some point, if you can scan or email them to me,
Okay.
or I can scan them, because I like to put pictures with the story. So,
Yeah.
okay, 2005. Are you okay? You're in a reserve status, but when you're there, you're full time. I mean, you're active duty.
Right, right.
So you come back home. Do you enter the reserve status for 5 more years?
Yeah, get back into the
Same
reserve
unit in
system.
Denver, back and forth.
Yeah. No, this time I was actually assigned to a different battalion. They were out of Denver, but it was a different one. It was an engineering battalion.
You're first lieutenant. You're still first lieutenant. At what time are you promoted to
Yeah.
captain?
I believe I went through the process online, and I got promoted to captain as soon as I got back from Iraq.
So you went from first lieutenant to captain.
Right.
Okay. When you're in Iraq in a war situation, are the subordinate? Do they always salute you, the privates and corporals, every time they go by you, or is it like when you're in Iraq, it's not a big deal, or is it?
Yeah, the bigger bases, I think they would salute, but the smaller FOBs, it was kind of like safety. You know, you had to keep your hand on your weapon and different things like that. So they said, no, there's no saluting here.
Yeah, in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, wearing the insignia will get you killed too. But as an officer, but did you have first lieutenant? Do you have like a bar?
Yeah, first lieutenant was, well, at both bars. First lieutenant was 1 bar, and captain was 2 bars.
2?
Right.
Okay, so you got 2 bars. That's cool. You still have them?
Somewhere, I've got a box in back of my closet of kind of my Army memories and memorabilia.
Let's get to Afghanistan. So 2005 to 2010, you're working. Did you get married in that time? Yeah, you did.
I did, yeah.
So you get married, you're in the reserve status, you're still every once a month, and an annual training 2 weeks out of the year.
Correct.
So 2005, 6, 7, are you monitoring the situation in Iraq and then into Afghanistan? Is there an actual time we went from Iraq to Afghanistan, or just kind of all merged together?
They were all merged together, but I was, for sure, I'm the type of person I like to keep up with the news, so I was keeping up with what was going on. And then I found out that, I was going to be around 2010 or 2011, I got my orders to go to Afghanistan.
Where do those orders come from? Like division headquarters, or from the Pentagon, or?
I think the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm. So they filter down to the ranks. So we
Right,
need another unit or troop or company over in
Right.
Afghanistan. So you're going to go to Afghanistan. Upon hearing that news, was it met with a joy, or was it like, oh no? I mean, how did you receive that news you're going to go to Afghanistan? Or did you kind of know it was going to come?
I didn't really know it was going to come. Well, I mean, at that time, we knew that there was definitely a likely possibility that either as a battalion, or especially in my situation as an individual augmentee, that I could be probably definitely a likely possibility that I would be deployed again. So I remember there wasn't much reaction other than, okay, I got my orders, this is what I got to do. It was a little tougher because I also had 2 small children by that time. So it was difficult. It was more difficult from that aspect, having my family back home.
Well, tell me about Tanya. How did she marries you, she knows you're in the Army, and
Right.
you might have to go overseas. She's supportive of that. Well,
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Because that's tough on the families, man.
It is. Yeah. That was the main reason why, when I got back from Afghanistan, I had completed my 8-year commitment, but I knew how tough it was on the family, and that's kind of why I decided that and my wife and I have a nonprofit organization, and it was really hard to stay on top of that. So just between the stress and the strain on my family, and not being able to manage the nonprofit organization, when I got back, I realized, and I had completed my 8-year commitment, so that's when I decided that was going to be it. I wasn't going to try to do 20.
So you left in 2010 for Afghanistan?
Yeah, 2010, 2011.
Well, that's when I did that little interview at Community. It was like August or something, I don't know. And then you left, I took you to the airport.
Correct, yeah.
And then you're gone for 6 or 12 months.
That was 12 months.
So another 12 months.
Right.
Whew. Okay, so walk me into Afghanistan. You were still with the 1st Infantry Division?
No, this time I was assigned to I believe it was the 369th Engineering Battalion, and they were out of Darien, Illinois. And they were going over there. Their mission was route clearance. It was an engineering battalion, and they would go out before the supply convoys and the transportation convoys between the different bases. They would go out and clear the way of IEDs.
Even though they do that, sometimes they don't get them all, do they?
No, no.
So did you experience casualties, death, wounded troops in Afghanistan?
Yeah, definitely more in Afghanistan than in Iraq, because that route clearance was a very dangerous mission. And so even though the vehicles were upgraded and made a lot stronger, there were still sometimes that the IEDs would penetrate.
Were you ever called into the field for an injury, or just after the fact when they bring him back to the field hospital or whatever?
No, just usually when they brought him back, because there were a few times when I was actually out on patrols with a particular platoon, and thankfully we never encountered any IEDs at that time. But the times that a platoon did strike an IED, I was not with them, but then I would be called when they were brought back to the hospital, the field hospital, or the medic tent.
And you would go in there and you would...
Right.
What do you do when you first have contact? Do you start talking to them, or do you pray with them? What do you do?
Yeah. Well, so it's important, I think, up front to start to go around and meet the soldiers and talk to them and get to know them. And then you find out where they're at spiritually and how open they are to that. And so if it happens to be a soldier that you know derives comfort from that relationship with God and through prayer, then obviously we provide that.
Did you ever give communion to someone that's injured like that? Did they ever ask for communion?
No,
Okay.
never had that. I did a lot of communion, but it was always in the field church service setting.
Wow. Would you just like have a sermon that you would share that day? You talked about Joseph.
Yeah.
That you would just encourage them. And,
Right. Yeah, it was just like, I had my Bible and a few books and resources and just sermon preparation.
Are these memories still pretty vivid, or did you come home and just want to forget about all of it? What we're talking about here?
Yeah, it kind of feels like it's a closed chapter. So a lot of things I just kind of wanted to put behind me. But obviously there's some things that I'll never forget. But this is actually the first time I think I've ever talked to anybody about my experiences.
Is it good what's happening right now? Do you think it's good?
I think so. I mean, when I walk away from here, I'll know for sure. But I think it is.
Hope you won't have any nightmares. I've talked to people
No.
before where but they wanted to come to me. They wanted to talk. They'd never talked.
Yeah.
And now we're talking, with the World War II veterans, it was 60 years before a lot of them talked.
Right.
Vietnam, 50 years, a lot of them.
Right.
So this is more recent. So what was the toughest situation in Afghanistan? I mean, do you remember an injury or casualty or somebody in need? What was maybe one of the hardest situations you had to deal with in Afghanistan?
Yeah. Like I say, there were a few more in Afghanistan. And one in particular, I think, was when a rocket actually, they shot rockets into the Taliban shot rockets into the bases all the time, mortars and rockets. Most of them, thankfully, just landed and exploded harmlessly, but occasionally one would do some damage and cause some injury and death, and one in particular that caused some death, and just dealing with that was difficult.
Did you deal with civilian deaths in Iraq or Afghanistan where you'd see the casualties?
Yeah, definitely, because there was a lot of civilian contractors over there as well. And so I was there to try to help out everybody, civilian, it was the civilian contractors that wanted church. And there again, that's the importance of a chaplain going around and visiting with different people in their area, whether they were civilian contractors or soldiers, and getting to know them and finding out if they wanted a church service and bringing church to them. And so that was a big part of what we did, and that up front, getting to know them and going around visiting with them and just understanding where they're at spiritually, trying to understand where they're at spiritually.
But did you see death? I mean, like a lot of these guys that I've interviewed, they saw the horrors of war, not just combat deaths or injuries, but did you see civilians that were wounded or killed alongside the roads or anywhere in your tours, your 2 deployments?
No, I know one time in Iraq when we were on a convoy, our vehicle was kind of in the middle, obviously because we were one of the least protected vehicles, so we were in the middle, and the lead vehicles got attacked. It was an ambush, but by the time we drove by, I mean, it was pretty weak, ill-conceived ambush, and so the lead trucks pretty much eliminated that threat quickly. So by the time we got there, I mean, there was a lot of rubble, and I didn't actually see any of the dead enemies, but we knew they were there, They were, because it was just the little shack or hut or whatever they tried to ambush from was just completely obliterated.
Wow. People that would come to you, did you interact with the men or the women, the troops? Did any of them become kind of disillusioned of what they were doing there? I mean, like, I've lost my way, kind of like, or was there always a real strong purpose? Everybody knew what they were doing, or was there a disillusionment about maybe a lot of the people that were there?
I think for the most part, everybody had a pretty strong sense of purpose. I think obviously just seeing the Twin Towers fall, I think just instilled that patriotism and that sense of purpose. So yeah, I think for the most part, everybody was pretty resolved.
So Afghanistan was colder, more casualties, more incidents as far as that. Sounds like a silly question, but who were we fighting in Iraq? Who were we fighting in Afghanistan? World War II, we fought the Germans and the Japanese. Mm-hmm. In Korea, we fought the North Koreans and the Chinese. In Vietnam, we fought what they called the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese regulars. Who were we fighting in Iraq? Who were we fighting in Afghanistan? Is there a name for the enemy?
Yeah, initially we thought it was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but then it turned out to be more just insurgents. And that was kind of disillusioning because we thought we were doing them a favor, but yet you had some of these insurgents rise up that were Iraqis and wanting to fight against us. So that was a little difficult, but it wasn't much of a threat. We were able to minimize that. But now obviously the Taliban in Afghanistan, they were a lot tougher. It was much more difficult against the Taliban in Afghanistan.
Did they wear uniforms of any kind?
No, and then that made it even harder because they would just blend in with the civilians, and they were smart. I mean, they knew our rules of engagement. They would fire at us. They'd drop the RPG or their weapon or whatever. I can't remember the names of their weapons. It was the Russian weapons they had at the time. But anyway, they would AK-47. Mm-hmm. They had those, and they'd drop them and pick up a shovel or a hoe and just kind of laugh at us because they knew that the rules of engagement. They knew our rules of engagement. So, and they blended in with the civilian population, and they were very difficult to fight against.
Well, that's what the Viet Cong were.
Yeah.
They were sympathizers, and they would be raking their fields in the daytime and at night going around shooting people.
Well, yeah, and that's what these guys were doing. They'd be working and just taking care of their business, but then at night they'd be out planting IEDs or setting up ambushes. And for them, war was just kind of like, back here in the United States, a lot of people during season, it's like, oh, let's go hunting or go play golf. For them, their season was war. It's like war season. Let's go build IEDs. Let's go out at night, put them in the roads, figure out ways to evade or avoid their measures or their means for trying to, our means for trying to find the IEDs. So it was kind of a cat and mouse game, and they were pretty good at it.
It's interesting in my study of war, the art of war, it's like this mentality of terrorism and you know, I know a gentleman I interviewed, Sean Bashard, his brother Nathan Bashard was killed in Iraq by an explosion. He was driving a vehicle, and people would say, well, Nathan died for his country, and Sean said, no, he didn't. He didn't have a chance. He got blown up.
Right.
So, but he did die for his country,
right.
as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
But my point is that the conventional warfare is long, long gone.
Right.
You know, a uniformed enemy, it almost gives me respect for the Japanese and the Germans in World War II, because we had a uniformed enemy. Now, they didn't all follow the Geneva Convention, but it's like, to me, it's a cowardly form of warfare, if you want to call it that.
Right.
To just blow something up or have a remote control and not come out and fight.
Right.
I can imagine the language that they would.
Right.
It's just like, come on, you know. And to me, that would be frustrating, because I feel the Marines, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Coast Guard, what have you. You know, in years past, that's how we fought. So this warfare now, I hate it.
Yeah.
I think the uncertainty of war would freaking drive you crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Back then, it was a kind of a linear battlefield, almost like football, line up, and the strongest team won. But Iraq and Afghanistan, it was asymmetrical. I mean, there was no defined line, and the enemies kind of came out of nowhere, hid, and it was very difficult.
We had no front lines in these wars now. There's no front lines. It's just, to me, that would wear on me. If I went over there, because I know a lot of these guys, we're going to go over there, we're going to kick butt, we're going to get payback, and they came home and like, I don't know if we did that. We felt like we were policemen and not able to do what we wanted to do. The whole rules of engagement thing, man.
That was very frustrating.
I've got a video. It was given to me by a gentleman in Fargo, John Darling, who was in the Army. And when he came home, and I met him 10 years later and got an interview, but he gave me a little video. And in this video was like a night vision thing going on the screen. It looked like a video game. And they saw, you know, the little the night vision thing. You see the people, you see the vehicle. It's like infrared. And they're passing weapons back and forth in the field. And they're ready. Engage, engage. You see a weapon, yeah, engage. Eventually, they took them all out, and they just vaporized on this video. They just, pew. It wasn't like, oh, they fell over dead. It was amazing video, and I've got that video. But it's like the rules of engagement. Because I'm talking about, they had to see a weapon. There had to be something visible, a threat. Did you see the movie American Sniper with Chris Kyle?
I did not.
Well, I'm not big on Hollywood depicting anything in real life. But in this movie, Chris Kyle was a sniper, an American sniper. And I've interviewed snipers too, of all wars. So, in the trailer for this movie, there's this woman with looks like a nun's robe on and a little kid. It looks like she's concealing something, you know? So this trailer is like, I've got him in my sights. It's real tense, a trailer.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why I'm sharing this, but and then, of course, the trailer ends before did he fire or not. But if she would have pulled out an RPG, they would have taken her out.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, people, well, you're a baby killer, this, that. Civilian casualties are part of war. But so you can kind of understand. I don't understand. We're not going to get into the rules of engagement, really, but just the fact that kept us, I think, from doing a lot of things in Vietnam and in Iraq and Afghanistan. So the politicians are kind of trying to run things.
Right.
You know, I had a Vietnam veteran, SK, say that it was something like, we won the war, Congress lost the peace, or something like that. Just like, you know, the politics of war. But did you sense politics in the times you're there? Was it mainly just your Army unit was there, or was politics factoring into a lot of the decisions being made?
Oh, it was huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was huge.
Just a couple more questions and we're just about done as far as Iraq and Afghanistan. Did your time in Iraq and Afghanistan as a chaplain, did it strengthen your faith in God, or did it maybe hinder it a little bit, or how did you come out of there?
That's a really good question. It made I lost my faith in modern Western theology and the institutional church because of the message that I think we get back here, that somehow if you go to a church, or specifically my church, somehow you're going to be a little more blessed and protected, and you're going to be a better person, and you're going to be more prosperous. And over there I realized I'm not sure I believe that message. And one situation in particular, really, there's actually a couple of situations that brought it home to me. One was a soldier that we had, and his dad was a pastor, and his mom was a really strong pastor's wife, and she used to really like to broadcast it, that how she was praying for everybody over here, and angels were protecting us, and really vocal about that, and strong in that belief. Well, her son got killed by a sniper, and a lot of other soldiers got serious injuries over there, and they weren't. So I'm thinking, okay, well, where's their protection? I mean, they were just as susceptible to death and injury just like any other soldier. And then another situation where there was a friend here that had a grandson that was dying of cancer very young, and so I was kind of keeping up with that situation, and same thing, real going to church, and had all these prayer chains praying for him. And I even had this one civilian over there and I was on this one particular small base, and we had this little church service, and this civilian contractor, well-meaning, but he said, well, I have the gift of healing through my words, and I will pray for this young man, and he will be healed because I just have this gift. And I'm desperate, like everybody else, really wanting this young man, this boy, to be healed. And so then I left the base. He's gone. Never see this guy again. He was very confident, very bold in what he prayed and what he believed. Well, the young man died. So I'm thinking, this guy was wrong, and of course he's never going to know that this young man died, passed away. So I'm thinking, yeah, the message that we get here through modern Western theology, I'm just not seeing it in empirical evidence. So I still have a strong faith in God. I mean, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. I read the Bible as much as I can. I pray as much as I can. And for me, prayer is very similar to the communication I had with my family back home. Every day, well, if I was in my bigger bases, every day I'd get up in the mornings real early, and I would go to the phone center, and I'd call back home. And of course, my family would be getting ready to go to bed, but I'd talk to my family. And there were some bases that had Skype, so I would do the same thing, except I'd get to see them. And I'd make it a point every day to contact my family, and that was so encouraging to me, and just really gave me a lot of strength and helped my morale. And then once a week, I would go to a tent, and I'd use my 30 minutes to talk to my wife, just her and I, after the kids went to bed. I'd do that every Sunday. So that communication that I had with my family really strengthened me and encouraged me, but there wasn't anything they could do to protect me. And so I realized, for me, that's kind of the way prayer is. I pray all the time, and I find it to be very encouraging and strengthening and rejuvenating, but for whatever reason, I feel like God's just kind of letting things play out. He's not necessarily going to make us more prosperous. He's not going to make me a better person. He's not going to strengthen my relationships. He's not going to make me more prosperous. Like I think modern Western theology tries to teach. So in a way, my faith is stronger just because I definitely believe Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior, and I believe prayer is very encouraging. It gives me a lot of strength, and reading the Bible gives me a lot of encouragement and gives me a lot of strength. But just going to church and hearing this message that somehow I'm going to be a better person, I'm going to be more blessed, prosperous, just because I have these self-appointed prayer warriors praying for me, I don't see it in the empirical evidence. So that's why I say I still have a strong faith in God and Jesus Christ, but my faith in modern Western theology in the institutional church diminished a little bit over there. I mean, I think that obviously there's still a lot of good people in churches, a lot of good things come out of churches, but I just think the message that comes from modern Western theology is, I think it's kind of a tainted gospel.
Right on, brother. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. It sounds like, without going more in depth, I think it's a very selfish message. So, have you ever heard the expression, there's no atheists in the foxhole?
Yes.
Like in a war situation?
Right.
Well, I agree with that. I think when you get into a war situation, you got to call on some if you want to call the higher power. There's, but okay. One more question about Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay, did we win the war in Iraq? Did we win the war in Afghanistan?
I think we won in Iraq because we found Saddam Hussein and executed him, and we were able to effectively put down the insurgency. I think we lost in Afghanistan, for sure. I mean, I think the proof is in the fact that once we left, and it was a very ill-conceived exit, that the Taliban took over again, and they were just waiting. I mean, they were just biding their time, and they knew that it was just a matter of time before they could come back and take over again, which they did. So clearly, I think we lost in Afghanistan.
And tell me about that exit. You're talking about in the last year and a half.
Right.
Tell me about that ill-conceived, I don't even have adjectives to describe how sickening that was, but just expound just a little more on that exit, leaving all that equipment behind, and dear Lord Jesus.
Yeah. I think it's just kind of, our commander-in-chief and our administration right now they're pretty weak, and so I think just the way that happened was pretty sad, pretty tragic, and just left the door wide open for the Taliban to take over again.
Inconceivable. Okay, that's it. Okay, coming back home from Afghanistan, did you have a homecoming of sorts, more than Iraq, or was it?
A little more, yeah. I think
was it a good day?
There was a few. Yeah, there was a few more people there, family and some friends, and it was a few more people. Not as many. Again, coming back as a individual augmentee, not too many people knew that I was coming back. There was nothing on the news or anything like that. So, which is okay. I'm totally fine with that.
Do you have any video or pictures taken of that day? I'd like to put them in this story.
I think I got some pictures.
If you got any, let me know, because the end of this interview would be perfect for that. So,
okay.
Was there anticipation of coming home? You're done. What was your thought process? I'm done. I'm getting out. I mean, I've had enough. And
yeah, nothing. There was no ill feelings towards the military, or the Army. It was just knowing that how stressful it was on my wife and kids. And again, my wife and I have a nonprofit organization, and just not being able to stay on top of that and manage it was really hard. So it was just a matter of knowing that it was time. It was definitely time for me to get out. And traveling, being on the Western Slope was always tough, because we'd have to travel over to battalions that were over on the Eastern Slope for our 1 weekend a month. And even in the wintertime, and obviously people in the Western Slope know how difficult travel can be over to the Eastern Slope, especially in the winter. And even this time of year, you know, here we are May, and it can still be treacherous at times. So yeah, and it was difficult, but yeah, again, it was no negative feelings towards the Army or the military. It was just, I knew it was time for me personally to get out.
What year did you get out?
So probably about, I think that was like 2012.
You just got out after you got back. Yeah.
Right.
Looking back now, does your military experience have any part in your life?
It does. It does. I mean, not a huge part, but I'm a writer, so some of the books I've written, I bring in a lot of military into it. So probably from that aspect. But other than that, like I say, yeah, I don't. I'm not real. It's not a huge part of my life right now. Again, it's kind of like a closed chapter.
Was JP one of your soldiers?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, tell me your interaction with him. And were you there when he was wounded? Or?
I was, yeah. It actually happened to be with his battalion. It was a night. Well, I actually don't know what time the explosion happened, but by the time they had to fly him directly out of the theater, but some of his soldiers that were wounded less seriously came back to the medics tent, and I was there for them. But yeah, he and I formed a pretty tight bond, just getting to know him and just all the things we had in common. And obviously, you know, it's kind of like a parent. You don't show favoritism, but you got one that just seems to have, you connect with a little better. And he was one of those individuals that he and I just seemed to really have an instant rapport and really good connection. So yeah, it was really hard. And then communication is kind of spotty. So every time I traveled to another base, I'd try to contact the battalion and see if they got any information about how he's doing, trying to hear any updates, the briefs. And so it was difficult. But then I finally, towards the end of my deployment, I was at a much larger base, and I was able to call Walter Reed Hospital, which is where he was. And I was excited because I was finally going to be able to talk to him. And again, hearing that he survived every step of the way, but it still didn't look good. And of course, my situation that I shared earlier, I was really apprehensive. But to hear that he survived every step of the way, but did lose both of his legs, and then to be able to call him, that was one of those days I'll never forget, because I was very excited to be able to finally contact him. But then to hear how weak he sounded kind of brought me down again. But he's doing great now. He's just doing amazing things, and he's very inspirational. He's part of the Warrior Games, and just doing some really incredible, amazing things with his life, and just very inspirational. So it's kind of neat to see.
But did you meet him before he was injured?
Yes.
So you knew of him.
Yes.
And you guys connected even at that point?
Right. The rapport and the strong connection we had was before he was injured.
So what do you remember about the night he went out on patrol and was injured? Do you remember anything about it, or just hearing reports after the fact?
Just hearing that you know, they got hit, and that they were bringing the soldiers back to the medics tent. And then once I was there, I found out from the company commander that he was injured so severely that they just had to fly him directly out of theater. So then
like a medevac out?
Yeah, medevac. So that was
so you didn't get to see him when initial explosion?
No, didn't get to see him.
Okay, but you knew he was part of this?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you said you interacted with the others that were injured too?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Just as comfort again, not medically, just...
Right, yeah. Just provide some aid and comfort. We actually did get some pretty extensive training in first aid, but the medics there were so good that they didn't need me for that, and I wanted to make sure I was out of the way for that kind of work.
Was that one of the worst patrols, or were there others like that during your tour in Afghanistan?
That was the worst one, and then of course the one where I shared earlier where the soldier was killed by a sniper, that was obviously a bad one. There was another really bad one where a soldier was paralyzed, but yeah, the one where JP lost both legs, that was definitely the worst.
Yeah. SK, what does freedom mean to you after being in war and as an American citizen? What does freedom mean to you?
Good question. I think just it means being able to worship freely, have the way you want to worship, the way you want to interact with people, just having the freedom to do that, I think is very valuable. I mean, over there, in these Muslim countries, they kill homosexuals, and so so homosexuals obviously aren't under that threat here. And I think a lot of people take freedom for granted here and what they're able to do, and got the freedom to protest. Over there, you can't protest. If you are anti-government or you don't like something the government's doing, kids here can protest. Obviously, recently, I think they went way too far, but people have the right to peacefully protest. I think that's the key. And over there, in a lot of those countries, you can't, especially in Afghanistan, you cannot peacefully protest. And so we have the freedom to do that here. And it's a little disillusioning that a lot of people here kind of take that for granted and don't appreciate that fact. They feel entitled, but they just having that right to peacefully protest, and I think have certain beliefs and being able to express those beliefs on social media. For me, that's kind of my platform to express my beliefs. And so having the freedom to do so, I think is very valuable. And again, over in Afghanistan and even Iraq, they have more freedoms in Iraq, but still there's limits on what they can say and do over there. And we don't have those limits. And so I think a lot of people take that for granted, but I think that there's nothing wrong with being a superpower if we use it for good. Obviously, I think we used it for good in World War II. I mean, to help Jewish people, and I think that was very important. And so being a superpower and being able to help people out, I think that's awesome. I don't think there's anything wrong with being a superpower, where I think a lot of politicians today and a lot of people say, well, we shouldn't be a superpower status. Our nation shouldn't have superpower status, but I think it's a good thing when it's used for the right reasons.
And the price for freedom, what would you tell a young person who doesn't know about the price for freedom? What would you say, what's the price for freedom?
It's very difficult. I mean, a lot of soldiers sacrificed blood and their life to preserve this freedom, and don't take it for granted. I mean, it's, the saying is freedom isn't free, and a lot of soldiers paid for it with the loss of limbs and a lot of blood and their own life. And they did that to preserve those freedoms.
And what does the American flag mean and represent to you?
One nation under God. I mean, it definitely, I think it symbolizes to me a nation that I think sadly is getting away from it, but a nation that tries to adhere to biblical principles, tries to honor and worship God, and to me, that's what it's all about.
You wore the right shirt today too.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, Iwo Jima, the flag raising.
Yeah,
Man.
yeah, big.
I've had veterans say that they're woven into the cloth of that flag. They're woven into the cloth of the flag.
Yeah.
That's powerful. I had one person say, non-combatant, one of my YouTube viewers and supporters, say he was born with a debt, and that debt is to give back for what we have in this country, as a civilian, just to pay back.
Right.
And I agree with that. It's like we're born with a debt. So I think I just got one more question. I'm going to take a picture of us.
Okay.
But are you proud to be a veteran?
Yeah, I am. I think when we were attacked by terrorists, I think it was right for us to go in there and do what we needed to do to take care of that threat. and try to make sure that they don't do it again. So, yeah, I was definitely proud to be able to serve for that reason.
Amen. Wow, I'm going to ask you to do something. If it's, I don't know if you've watched some of my films. At the end, I ask the veterans to salute into the camera. Would you be okay with that if I ask you? Yeah, I just want you to actually just look into the camera. Don't look at me. Look right into the lens. And if you want to say something, if not, just go ahead and do a salute. That'd be great.
God bless America.
Amen, brother. Well done. I want to shake your hand on camera. It's still rolling. SK, thank you for your service to our country, brother.
Thank you for all you do.
Well, I just am indebted to you. We were born with a debt that we can never repay. And your service is greatly appreciated. I know a lot of people are going to say the same thing when they watch your story. So
we appreciate you. As a veteran, we really appreciate you and what you do and getting the stories out there.
It's important.
Thank you.
It's important. We're in a day, I tell people, people are trying to erase our history.
Right.
But I'm their counterpart.
Yeah, for
Not
sure.
going to allow it to happen.
Man,
so.
we need you. We need you and we love you.
Well, thank you. The feeling's mutual, brother. Okay, let's look right into the camera, and on 3, I'll give a big smile. 1, 2, 3.